Ready for chapter 29? A morbid flotsam. Flotsam. A morbid flotsam. Nothing had ever been colder or wetter than the water that night, or harder to move through. I felt as if I'd swallowed a tack as shot pierced my chest. My skirt knotted around my legs, not letting me kick as I knew I must. A wave flipped me all the way over, making me swallow half the sea before I fought my way back to the surface. My feet scrabbled to touch down just as the undertow dragged away the stones beneath. I was dunked again by the next swell. I tried to scream, "Mummy!" but salty foam filled my mouth. I clamped my teeth into my lip to keep from drinking more. I'd be ready for the next wave. Just watch. I'd be a boat. That's what. I'd float instead of sink. And so I did. I rode the surface of the water as it carried me toward the shore, not so very far after all, to a clumsy arrival on my hands and knees. I dragged myself across the stones, out of the churning water, and finally to rest, lying flat, the warmth of my tears most welcome on my cold, cold face. The relief was fleeting. My cheeks scraped and stinging pressed into the rough grit of the beach. With enormous effort, I turned my head, imagining the other cheek would find a feathery pillow instead of a bumpy gravel. Something lay on the sand, just a few feet away. Something bigger than me. Dark and motionless. Not something. Someone. Someone's body. Rose. Though barely able to turn my head a few seconds earlier, I now crawled like a beetle across the pebbled beach, lay on her back, arms flung wide. Oh, please, not greeting angels. Rose! Not so much as a shiver. Rose! I was not gentle, pushing tangled hair from her face and roughly patting her cheeks. Bruising showed on her neck and shoulder beneath the torn collar and sleeve of her coat. No, please, no. Could he have been so cruel? Please, Rose, please open your eyes. I remembered Nurse Wells, the silent woman who had tended Papa, reaching for his wrist each time she approached the bedside. Would I recognize a pulse if I found one? I lifted Rose's arms, but my hand was too numb to feel anything useful. I put 2 fingers in my mouth and sucked hard, willing the warmth to come. The steady clatter of water turning over pebbles was broken by a new sound. A faint cry. Not from the unmoving girl beside me. Could Leonard be returning to finish me off? The frightened girl, huddled and frozen, lifted her head and strained to listen. Knowing that readiness could decide her fate, she cast about for a weapon and found a stone, heavy and slick with seawater, perhaps deadly if it needed to be. I shivered and cast it away, holding instead to Rose's arm. Oh, do wake up! Again, a cry, closer now. Aggie! My name. In more than one voice. Here! I croaked. Waves crashed, stones slid and grated. My little voice was not enough. About as noisy as a toad call. I pushed myself to standing and held my hands beside my mouth as I'd seen men do and hollered on a cricket path. Here! I cried. Here! We need help! Rose did not stir. Help! Ahoy! Someone called. We're coming! A different voice. Keep calling! Where are you? Aggie! I'm here! We're here near the water! Help us, please! Footsteps. Friendly, wonderful footsteps crunching down the path and across the beach. Torch beams danced on the sand and several dark shapes emerged from leftover wisps of fog. Night clouds swirled, revealing suddenly the pale glow of the moon to light the dreadful scene. Hector came first. "Mais chérie, and me!" he cried. He threw his arms around me and then pulled hastily back. "Ugh," he said, "wet." I would have laughed because wet could not begin to describe how wet I was, but Rose. I said, "I don't know if she's alive or dead." "Blankets!" Hector shouted. "We need many blankets!" "What are you wearing?" I said. "You look ridiculous." "I am clothed in the cricket uniform of the Torquay police. I have many cozy layers." He shrugged off the outermost jersey and held it out to me. I pointed to Rose, and Hector draped her still figure with his meager offering. A man's voice had taken up the call. "Blankets! Back! Fetch blankets!" "And a doctor!" cried Hector. "And a doctor!" The voice belonged to Inspector Locke, suddenly standing right next to me. "Yes, sir!" called someone farther up the path. The inspector took one look at me and removed his ulster overcoat. He draped it across my shoulders and did up the top button. I was encased from neck to toe in a sudden warmth so welcome that I happily ignored the stench of bay rum cologne coming from its collar. The inspector knelt with a finger on the side of Rose's neck and then put his head on her chest. Hector took my hands and began vigorously to rub them with his own. "Has Leonard been caught?" I said. "He was just here. They should be looking for him. He put me inside." I pointed at the bathing hut. From here it looked to be rocking gently in the moonlight. How different a place could seem from only a few ways away. "He might have killed me. With Rose, he really tried. Please, please, please let Rose be all right." "No Leonard yet," said Hector. "I was wrong-headed," I said. "I should have listened to you. He got away because it was only me." "Perhaps he is not so far," said Hector. "You rescued me," I said. "You rescued Rose." But had I? Hot pricks of pain shot through my fingers and up my arms as the massage began to work. "We have a pulse," said Inspector Locke. A pulse. Tears flooded my eyes as I pulled away from Hector. I wanted to see her breathing, but there was such a knot of policemen crowding around that I could not get close. "Get her off the ground," ordered the inspector, "and into a warm bed at once." The officers churned the sand as they turned about, wondering how to carry her. "The medic hasn't come yet," one of them said. "We haven't got a stretcher." "No useful footprints," murmured Hector. "Sherlock Holmes would be most disappointed." "We don't need deduction," I said. "We already know who was on the beach." On the beach and gone. "The hotel has beds," I said, trying to get the inspector's attention. "Take Rose up there." I pointed to lights that earlier had not penetrated the frog, but now shone through 100 panes of glass. "I know you'd like to be helpful," said the inspector, "but you've done enough, I think." "Will someone remove these children?" he called out. "I want the guardians informed. They do not belong at a crime scene." "But I'm part of the crime," I protested. "Leonard pushed me into the hut and left me there. The sea was pouring in. You must find him. May we not watch for a little?" "No," said Inspector Locke. He tapped one of his constables. "Get these two home to their warm, wee cots. We'll take their statements tomorrow." "The girl may need to see the medic, sir," murmured the constable. "There's blood." "Blood?" I said. "I've got blood?" Hector touched his own cheek to show where I could find my injury. My fingertips came away dotted with blood. "Then get her tended to," commanded the inspector. "Yes, sir." No one produced a bandage or paid us a scrap of attention. The police had other worries for the moment. "Is Belle still here, at the top of the path?" I said. "With the cart?" "Yes, Belle is here," said Hector. "The villain must be attempting to escape on his own two legs." "How far do you suppose he could have run by now?" I lifted the hem of my borrowed coat so as not to drag it across the wet sand. "And who will drive us home?" "This I do not know." Hector crouched to examine something. "Inspector Locke!" he called. "Come to look, please. Here is evidence." I peered over his shoulder, but was firmly pushed to one side by an eager constable. "What is it?" said the inspector. "The boy is right," said the constable, peering down. "It looks like a man's glove. Yellow. Posh. Dropped in flight, I'd say." "You'd be saying in error," I said. Where had I got the nerve to sass a constable? "That glove belongs to Mr. Roddy Fusswell." What? Wait, what? I'm confused. How is Roddy's glove at the crime scene? Well, we better keep reading to find out. Chapter 30, a red herring. Wait, I gotta see my time, make sure I'm not late. Okay. Inspector Locke eyed me with a flicker of interest. "You recognize this glove, Miss Morton?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Roddy Fusswell was wearing it when he visited my home earlier this evening. When it came time for him to leave, one of the pair was misplaced. He was in a right sulk about it." I held his gaze, astounded at how well my mouth was working. "Those are the facts, sir. I believe that Leonard Cable stole it from our front hallway and dropped it here for the purpose of incriminating another man." Rose and I had giggled while Roddy whined about losing his silly yellow glove. We'd fled to what we thought was the safety of the pony cart, And there Leonard had stood, hands behind his back, appearing to wait respectfully to drive us into town. Oh, Leonard. My breath felt like lint in my chest. Were you always wicked? Inspector Locke ordered one of his men to put the glove in a burlap sack. We'll check to see if it's a match, he said. But for now, I'd like to get the victim to a hospital. Sir, I said, have you not enough men to look for Leonard as well? He murdered Mrs. Eversham and tried to strangle Rose. I felt my voice get small. And me. I said, he hurt me too. He cannot have gone far. And the inspector put his hands on my shoulders that were newly broad and sturdy under his coat. You've had a fright, Miss Morton, but now you must put your trust in the Torquay Constabulary. Get off the beach. We will arrange for a ride home. I looked over to where Rose was surrounded by men with torches. I sent a wish across the wind. Please be well. Hector and I hobbled slowly up the path, holding hands. Thank you for coming, Hector. You make also a good decision, he said. You are correct that time will not wait for the rescue of Miss Rose. We are the cunning foxes, you and I, two halves of the best resolution, no? How did you make them listen to you? I asked. A foreign boy must be considered even less reliable than an English girl. After my regrettable enthusiasm for powdered sugar as a weapon, the police believe me to be a nincompoop, he said. This is the correct pronunciation? Nincompoop? Yes, I said. I persist because of my concern for you and for Rose. Sergeant Cornell, he is most discourteous. Then up from the jail cell comes Mr. Standfast, who receives his valet with great relief. I say to him the words you say to me. The baby is Leonard Cable, the gardener and driver for Mrs. Morton. This lights a firecracker, which activity occurs kaboom. Hector's hands fluttered to show an explosion. At the top of the path, dear patient Belle whinnied and I neighed happily back. Hector climbed onto the cart where I joined him after giving the horse a good long pat. Alas, Hector lifted one foot and then the other, inspecting the once shining leather now battered and torn. My new shoes. Oh, poor Hector, I said. You were so proud of them. One thing this night is making clear to me, he said. I am a thinker and not built so much for the heroic action. I don't think anyone sets out to be a hero, I said. Perhaps not, agreed Hector, but a hero must face danger, and this I do not like. A hero sometimes faces danger, I said, like a dragon slayer or a nurse in a jungle hospital. But don't you think a hero might also be a person who does what no one else wants to do? Two officers trotted past, scattering stones from under their heavy boots. They carried a canvas stretcher rolled on two poles and disappeared down the path to the beach. That's borrowed from beside the hotel swimming pool, said a voice I knew too well. For old ladies who faint. Florence Fusswell materialized out of the darkness. She gave me an amazed and steady look, taking in the mass of sopping hair and Inspector Locke's enormous coat. Are you one of the girls who was attacked? I nodded, pushing back my hair and the coat cuff that dangled over my fingers. Are you harmed? Said Florence. A few scratches, I said, and my clothes are soggy. The inspector loaned me his coat. A constable came panting into the lobby saying 2 girls were hurt, said Florence. I never imagined it might be someone I know. How thrilling. Oh, you look terrible. Before I could find an answer, Florence hurried away back up the hill as her brother arrived with a steel flask. Hot drink for Rose, he said. It's rum with honey, so I shan't offer you any. You did well, though, finding Rose, I will say that. We've telephoned to the hospital. Medics have been dispatched. One of the constables insisted that I make a telephone call to your home. Your grandmother was not pleased to hear from me. He loosened the cap of the flask and tightened it again. But your family has been informed of your safety and your whereabouts. I believe a constable will assist in getting you safely home. Thank you, I said. When I leave Roddy Fusswell, he is drunk, whispered Hector. Now he is king of the rescue operation. A braggart and a bully, but not a killer. I should have been clever enough to realize that he wasn't clever enough, nor the least bit brave, just like Granny Birdie Cummings. My biggest worry at breakfast had been that Mummy would discover I'd been out riding a bicycle last night, and now there'd be no hiding the frightful story of this evening's adventure if she'd heard already from Roddy Fusswell. Constable Beck would no doubt tell his version to Charlotte. I was in for a shower of trouble. I am begging your pardon, said Hector. Does anyone know where the villain might be? Roddy Fusswell glared at him. see what time it is. Hold on. I got to see. Okay, we're still okay. Roddy Fusswell glared at him. The workings of the constabulary are no business of the foreign element. The foreign element? I nearly spat. The foreign element happens to be the reason the constabulary arrived in time to rescue Rose. Hector began to protest, but a clamoring bell announced the arrival of a carriage from the hospital. At the same moment, the inspector and several other policemen emerged from the shadowed path to the beach. The two men holding the stretcher poles were not sure-footed in the dark. My stomach turned over as Rose tipped awkwardly to one side. "Steady on there!" shouted Roddy Fusswell. "You'll have her overboard!" "Move!" Inspector Locke barked so abruptly that Roddy tripped over his own feet trying to get out of the way. Hector and I watched from our perch as the stretcher slid with a bump into the medical wagon. We pinched each other when Roddy Fusswell tried to insist on climbing in with her, only to be rejected by the attendants. He moved sulkily away, unscrewed the cap of the flask, and took a long drink. Just as the ambulance doors were fastened, Mr. Gus Fibley came trotting up the hill. "We meet again." He doffed his brown hat to Hector and me. His spectacles were slightly steamed over, the only sign that he'd been hurrying or breathing hard. "What the devil are you doing here?" said Inspector Locke. "You've got a nose like a bloodhound." Mr. Fibley grinned. "Yes, sir," he said. "I see a police horse galloping past and am compelled to chase it. What can you tell me about this connection between Miss Marianne Eversham and whoever's inside that medical wagon needing emergency care?" "Can't tell you a thing," said the inspector. "And unless you want to join the lady in the jail cell, you will put yourself a long way out of my sight. Only thing worse than children is a reporter. We've still got a killer on the loose." He marched off to bellow instructions at his men. I climbed to the ground with Hector right beside me. "Psst," I said to Mr. Fibley. He leaned down a little bit. "I know who's going to the hospital," I whispered. "Well?" said Mr. Fibley. "I know everything that happened here tonight." He looked at me closely, taking in the outsized overcoat, the bedraggled hair, my injured face, and general dampness. "But I do not want to be misquoted," I said. "It's my story, and I want it right." "First an accusation of murder," said Mr. Fibley, "and now blackmail." I shook my head. "I'm merely setting the terms for our interview. For now, I'll tell you who was in the ambulance. Tomorrow, you can come and hear the rest, or at least the parts that are not other people's secrets." Mr. Fibley removed his spectacles and polished the glass with great care, using a corner of his dotted necktie. "You'll be doing my job in about 10 years, he said, "and by then you may be allowed to wear a skirt even. For murderers." "Trousers look to be a good deal more practical," I said. "The best thing about men's clothing," said Mr. Fibley, "is no corsets. In my opinion, that small particularity explains a good deal about society itself. It's extraordinary how different the world looks when a person can breathe." "My advice," said Mr. Fibley, "is to avoid—" I could trust him. "It's Rose," I said. "Rose Eversham has been taken for medical care following an assault." "And where is the perpetrator?" he asked. "Who is the perpetrator?" Inspector Locke was here again, interrupting before I could think of what to say. "Did you not hear me?" he said. "This young lady will not speak to a reporter until she is accompanied by an adult member of her family. If you're lucky, it won't be her grandmother. Now go." Mr. Fibley jammed his spectacles back on and set out at a run on the tail of the hospital wagon. Was he right? Might I be a writer someday, hurtling down the road in pursuit of a story? "I'll have my coat now, if you please," said the inspector, looming over me. "It may be an endless night looking for this scoundrel." He lifted the coat from my shoulders along with its envelope of warmth. "You can use one of the blankets." He pointed to the police wagon. Hector hurried over to fetch a gray wool blanket with Torquay Station embroidered across one end. "Don't touch that nasty thing." Florence was back. "I've brought you some of my clothes." She handed me a bundle. "You're bigger than I am, but I did the best I could." Tears of grateful surprise sprang to my eyes. I clutched the offered clothing and stepped behind Belle to make good use of it. Florence held the blanket as a curtain while I wrestled my wet things off. Was it more absurd that I was nearly naked on a public road, or that I was pulling on a skirt and sweater belonging to Florence Fusswell? Oh, no single morning could a person wake up confident about what might happen that day. Was it God in heaven who had an eccentric sense of humor, or the nature of humans to be entirely unpredictable? Remember, Florence did not like her, right? Florence's skirt came only just below my knees, and I could pull up the stockings hardly high enough to cover anything with decency, though it was all better than what I'd had before. Florence kept chattering on the other side of the blanket. Your feet could never fit into my shoes. They're custom-made from Italian leather. I brought my mother's Wellington boots instead, and her Persian lamb jacket, though she'll be furious. But how often does a person have the opportunity to loan one's clothing to a nearly murdered fatherless waif? Lavinia will die of envy. So she's enjoying the fact that she gets to be nice to somebody that was caught up in this whole scandal. I knew I must look hideous, but I was dry, making these possibly the best garments I'd ever worn. Oi! A shout from up near the hotel. I flung aside the blanket and stopped out from my hiding spot. Sodding villains, stay put! Let me go! An angry scuffle and more shouts. Hey, stop! You there, stop! And that's the end of the chapter. No! So, we are down to just 2 chapters. So we've got to have the ending here, right? We got to have the ending. Okay, so tomorrow will be the end. Woo! Oh, all right. Bye.